Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for all coming. For those of you who are new, I'll explain how this works. Okay, you will pick a numbered table to begin your first pairing. Every 6 minutes you will hear. That will indicate the end of your time together, at which time the next pairing will begin. I know 6 minutes is not a long time to get to know someone. That's why myself and the other tavern staff will use the questionnaires you filled out to match you up at the end of the evening. Let the matchmaking begin.
Anyway, that's why I'm looking for a new adventuring group. Say, you're pretty big for a magic user. What are you, 6'8", 290? Why'd you decide to become a magic user instead of, like, I don't know, a fighter or a paladin?
Well, my father was a magic user. His father was a magic user, and his father was a magic user, and, well, his father was a chicken farmer, but he really loved card tricks. Hey, could you help me out before you leave? Need a little help filling out my card. I'm still learning my letters.
So, Terrence, is it? What's your go-to move to acquaint yourself to a new town? I mean, how do you introduce yourself to the townsfolk?
I'll either stab him with my sword, or I shoot him with a crossbow. Stab, stab, stab.
Hey, I worked with a bard down in Neverwinter. Really good to have on the team. Played a lute like nobody's business. What's your instruments of choice?
I love the accordion. And that's when I realized that I could bend the will of nature to do my bidding. I shall conquer the nations of the worlds with my mastery over woodland animals and foliage, and all shall bow before me and call me Master Pookins.
Who are you talking to? I'm over here.
Slice, slice, slice.
I have to say, you're the first warlock I've ever met that has a sloth as a familiar.
Why are you leaving so early? Where's your card?
I've decided to go a different way with picking my next adventuring party. These character backgrounds are a little bit much for me. Thanks anyway.
Welcome to Roleplay Geeks. I'm your host, Frank.
I'm your picking hippie John.
Jim.
I am the tail end of Jim's interactions.
And this is Steve-O, a.k.a. The Other Steve.
And we're joined again this week by our good friend Andrew, who's going to talk to us a little bit about his thoughts on today's topic, which is backgrounds. So this is an area that I'm not sure we give enough thought to, which can have a potentially major influence on how you game. And that's your character's background story. Now, the popular sort of view of, or the mechanics of when you sit down to role play is you roll up a character. And when you roll up a character, it exists. Prior to that, that character does not exist. But in reality, if you're talking about a character, they've got a history that predates the moment that you sit down and start adventuring. And that's the background. Now, it doesn't matter if you're rolling up a fresh, new 16-year-old D&D character. They've had 16 years of life that have gotten to that point. And certainly other games have a more in-depth background generation device of some sort. For example, Traveler, you start off with a character that can be 70. If you wanted to. But the process of rolling up a character helps you fill out some of that backstory. But we're going to talk a little bit about backstories, how you can make them, where they come from, and how they can inform some of your gaming. So let's start off with a first point, which is, I don't know, because I lost my train of thought because I was distracted trying to read Jimmy's thing.
I wrote it in English. It's typed out. It's a regular typeface font kind of thing.
I literally had a thought, and then I read your thing, and it conflicted for some reason, and then my brain just shut off for a second. And so whoever's editing this gets to edit that out.
Or keep it
Or
in.
not.
Or not. Okay, so let's talk about how do you come up with a background. Now, I'm going to point at Steven specifically on this because, as we've said in the podcast, he is by far the best of inventing a backstory for your character of anyone I've ever played with personally. So what's the process for you of creating your backstory if you're making it completely yourself, if it's not game mechanic defined? I'm going to throw it to everyone eventually, but let's start with Steven.
Yeah, Steven is the master. He could teach a course in this with, a lot of asides that take hours to, convey and have nothing to do with the topic. But at the end of it, he'll start talking about bigums.
Aw.
Yeah, you stole his thunder, man.
Aw. I love Ribs so much. I love him. One game, and that's all he had. One game. And 20 plus years of memories. So
cannibals just don't get a lot of playtime.
What?
Cannibals just don't get enough playtime.
Oh, that's true.
Or plate time.
Rim shot.
Were we actually going somewhere with this?
There were 5 players in our party, and then one of them mysteriously disappeared, and Bigums looks a little larger.
How come he's not starving?
He's got a distended belly.
Is that a toothpick?
Okay, so let's get back to the topic at hand. Steven, talk to us a little about your process for creating a backstory for your character. Your characters.
So backstory is so hard for people that they put traits in role-playing games where you can roll on a random table and see that you are a hero of the people or, somebody who has an enemy or anything like that. It's in Traveller. It's in Dungeons & Dragons. It's in all these different game systems because people need help creating characters. Especially on the DM side, because you get a bit of brain drain sometimes just trying to figure out who the hell the party's going to meet when you're making something on your own. But as a player, I think the biggest thing that is an impediment to someone creating a real character, a memorable character, and doing a backstory that fleshes this out is fear. It's I've got writer's block. I really can't think of it. All that. It's embarrassment. It's what if people don't like it? What if I look stupid? And all of those things, all of those roadblocks, people need to just kind of throw out the window because this is a game meant to be enjoyed and it's a fantasy game. If we're talking specifically about Dungeons and Dragons, for God's sakes, you could be anything. You'd be a goat-legged boy who just happens to, like wheat. And his whole life revolves around wheat. And
Stop talking about my family like that, man.
This has turned into a workshop.
Right.
Okay,
right.
All right. At the risk of going off the rails a bit too much, let's pull it back into the topic. Obviously, that was thrown out for hubris, but I'm going to push back on that just a little bit.
Yes.
In reality, though, most of our backstory, maybe not for you, but it would seem to me as somebody who's very, very bad at making up backstories, so bad that I almost never do it for a whole lot of reasons. But it would seem to me that every backstory has to lead to your character that you've made, right? I mean, you can make a backstory of a character, but if you're not playing that character, who cares? It's irrelevant. So you have to have something that informs the decision of why are you playing a cleric? Why are you playing a pilot? Why are you playing a college professor or investigator? Why are you playing this? Why have you gotten to this point? So there is some constraint, don't you think, on what you do?
Well, yeah, the whole reason that the goat-legged boy who loves wheat decided to become a rogue was because he was hungry. And the problem was he was awful at it because of his hooves. So he had to work really hard.
I mean,
see what I mean? See what I mean?
That's going to be your next character.
He can create a character immediately Immediately, he starts making a backstory.
Well, okay. Let's tease that again. I'm going to pick at this a little further.
Actually, I wanted to say something on this. So the thing is that I've always looked at this aspect of games having backstory information or other aspects, not because people can't come up with things themselves. I don't think it's really that difficult to, but I think part of the issue is to limit what people come up with, or with the idea like this. I mean, like, you know, or maybe to.
I gotta do that here.
or maybe it's an issue with like an issue of maybe maybe it is some of that and stuff, but you know, like, I always thought, well, you know, if I was going to create a background for my character, it would be richer than what you have, you know, just I'm a fighter, or, you know, I'm a rogue, or I'm a cleric, or something like that. And then the thing is, you have to then get past the issues that might come in with adding in these things. You know what I mean? Like, well, I was a cleric, and I was a defrocked, you know, cleric and stuff. I was really high up in so and so, blah 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 blah. And it's like, well, with that background, it kind of assumes some things that would make your character potentially stronger than what he should be. You know, I mean, like, what you might be saying is that, you know, your background story would lend itself to more of like a 5th level cleric than the 3rd level the GM has you starting with. Now, admittedly, you can also say that, well, okay, if you're going to do maybe this particular game system, everyone's going to be Indiana Jones. There are things going to be an archaeologist who's great with a whip. You know what I mean? I can see that where they might be niching themselves into a story from a book or movie, and so that can be an issue too, I guess. But I always kind of looked at it more as a way to limit a player from going off the rails completely and having a character that was so awesome that it kind of defies belief.
So, all right.
So, I don't know.
To that point, let's tease at what Steven just did there. Okay, so he said, from my perspective, he did not, in fact, start from a rogue. At least you didn't articulate it that way. You articulated it with, this character is obsessed with wheat. And the very next thing you said, or actually you said one-legged goat boy, and then you said obsessed with wheat. And then you said what class that would be. Okay, so, which is, you have to admit, it's sort of the backwards way than most people do. I mean, most people sit down and make a character, and they say, I'm going to make a whatever. I'm going to make a Marine. I'm going to make a fighter.
Boy, not one-legged goat boy. He's
a
goat-legged boy.
It's the moves that kill me. It's like he's always failing his stealth rolls. My God.
Disadvantage on all his stealth checks.
Exactly.
Actually, the worst part would be using thieves' tools.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Get him some boots of elven kind.
Exactly. But would they fit? I mean,
so, but let's tease that out. How did you get? Do you start that way normally? Do you start with, I'm going to play a paladin, to come up with a backstory? Or do you come up with a backstory that seems interesting to you? For this was done for comedic effect to make Jimmy go off the rails, as he's not done in however many podcasts. But I mean, do you start with that point and then say, therefore, it makes sense for him to be a whatever, or it's amusing for him to be a whatever, or it's, you know, an interesting color point to be a whatever?
Well, if people would look at it a little more simply, like, let's say I want to play a druid, and I go, okay, I want to play a druid. Right. But I also know that today, 2 of us on the podcast are congested. So I want to play a druid, but the problem is he has allergies. And so he has to stay away from the forest. And especially at certain
That's
times
a bad
of year.
career choice,
so he's
man.
sequestered himself. Right.
He's a
So
druid
his
of the beaches
goddess
and
of the
sand
forest.
dunes.
Yes.
The
See,
druid
that's
with
it.
hay fever.
Okay,
He took himself to the sand dunes, where he became focused on things like, bearded lizards, things like that exist, more towards the fringes of a forest desert boundary. So his whole focus became on reptiles. And
okay, so in this case, you started with, I want to play a druid.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so very typical. I think most of us start kind of that way when we're making a character. I want to play a whatever's appropriate for this system. And then you started constructing a backstory that was, again, you started with something contradictory, something atypical. Is that critical, do you think, to the backstory approach that you have? So, for example, you made a paladin.
Steve likes to be a martyr in everything he does. So he has to start off with some. I'm just being facetious here, but he does like that. He likes that dichotomy of a needed character, but he also likes them to be tortured. I think it's part of his own life leaking into
his comfort zone.
Fantasy. It's his comfort zone. That's a good way to put it.
Tortured soul.
So he wants things, but that's part of the interesting part of the character. He wants them to be interesting, and so having some sort of basically disadvantage in the GURP system, his character would be like 18 disadvantages all the way down the daggone page. There wouldn't be any advantages; it'd be all disadvantages. But then he'd have like 1,000 skills because he had so many character points left over for him. So I think that's exactly. But it makes an interesting character to play. And then he is his own foil. That is the simplest way. His character is his own foil.
And part of that is that in Steven's example, he said in many, many times that his characters have a credo. Is that the proper word? I don't know. Something that they say, this is an absolute who I am. This defines who I am as a character, as a person, this fictional person. Does that come quickly in the process, or is that an outcome of the process for you?
Oh.
Or does it depend on the particular scenario? You have a thought and you go, that's the thought I'm having, and therefore all these other things must follow.
I think it depends on what comes to mind, and I think that I'm kind of whiteboarding in my head, and it's like a brainstorm whiteboarding session in my head. So it's possible that there at the beginning, I would have some kind of character statement, like almost like the ones you'd roll up in D&D at certain times, where if I see someone being taken advantage of, I am compelled to turn a blind eye and walk away. Or maybe not that particular credo. That's kind of cruel. I probably wouldn't do that credo, but it depends on the process. And I think that if people would just open themselves up to the fact that no matter what they do, it won't be wrong, they can absolutely put people that they know, things about themselves into a character and build on it and have it be something new and special. You all talk about that I'm good at this, but I look at people like Chris, for instance, and the things that he has done with characters and traits that they have that have allowed him to build a backstory that is rich and diverse and weird and compelling. Whether it's, his weird Ravenloft nun or the Goblin Pirate or things like that. And it's not a quick thing, really. I mean, I could throw out something off the cuff, but those are just a few traits that give you something identifiable. But it doesn't fill out the character to make its motivations rich or the interactions that it's going to have with other characters rich. Those things need to be thought of a little more. And I think if people would just go into it and just brainstorm on a sheet of paper and kind of whiteboard it with themselves and not worry about what other people think about it, that it just opens up a whole lot of possibilities on the creation side.
So I'm going to make an assumption here that may be unfair, and I apologize if it's not, if it's unfair. My perception, and maybe erroneously, is that, Jimmy, you would represent more of the opposite side of this, that you don't give as much thought or much thought at all to the backstory bit of your character, that you kind of invent it on the fly.
Yeah, as a player, I'm that way.
As a player.
As a game master, I'm more like Steven in some respects where...
Well, I think we'll get to the game master stuff in a minute, because
Okay.
I do think that's a different situation. But as a player, you have sort of the opposite perspective. I'm going to play a mage, and I'm going to make the decisions necessary to construct that in the rule system. And do you think about backstory at all? Does it inform anything?
No. More like traits, like Zuzu, or my other character. What's my other goblin gnome's name in your game? I can't remember his name.
Yeah,
but yeah,
it's also Zuzu. You reused the name.
Yeah, I might have. Yeah, it's that character is. I just came up with a couple of traits, like a voice, and then like this megalomania sort of attitude to the world, and then I build off of that, and then how he'd respond based on just those two traits.
So the background that got you to that point is irrelevant from your perspective. This is what they are now. How they got to there is not terribly necessary for you.
Well, for your
process.
Not for me. The first time I ever really had an impactful background was Steve-O's Call of Cthulhu adventure, and that actually led me to implement some of that rich backstory into the Traveler game I'm doing now to sort of give it a little bit of a bump, to integrate your characters a little bit better.
Apologies, I kind of blew through John here. You had something you want to raise.
Yeah, really, I'm really more what you're going for with Jamie.
Okay.
I generally don't do background stuff at all. I will sometimes do some, but generally I'm playing a rogue, or I'm a marine or whatever, and I don't really worry too much about it. I don't do a lot of backstory or like the built-in flaws or anything else that might go along with some of this. Like Steve does. I'm just there to kind of play it and enjoy it. I usually am there more for the story as a collective, the whole party, not so much my character's story, I guess is the way to put it. Now, that changed when we did do Steve-O's game. We did he had like a complete backstory, and mine was I think actually kind of pivotal in some of it. At least, my character had a whole rationale for why I was going here and what I did, and I had a person I needed to save. I was emotionally invested in multiple ways, and it was actually really fun to play it, and I really tried to play it. It was kind of given to me. I didn't create it. It was one that Steve-O had created in his head and said, "Here's your character. Here's the people that you know or knew, and this is the person that you're tasked with saving." And it was really fun. It was actually one of the most enjoyable game sessions I've had, Steve-O. I will say it was one of the best gaming sessions the story was really fun because I had that. It was really enjoyable. I liked it because then I felt like, I've got this character to kind of keep. I've got these people to keep in mind, and so my decisions were based on what I did for the characters. In fact, there was a couple of things that normally I would have done differently if it would have been just me playing a character, playing this Marine. I don't know if anybody noticed it or not, but there was like a couple of times that I completely left the area or did some things completely different because the person I was there to save was the girl. And so I was more worried about getting her out of the catacombs rather than shooting up the dark wizard, whatever his name was. I can't remember his name right now. And so I played the character. Shut up. So I actually played my character as I thought he, would have really been acting in all of these situations, and I really enjoyed that. It was very fun, and it made it a very rich, story. I thought, and I thought it made it for the whole, collective story worked out really well. So I don't know. I really enjoyed that, but it was given to me, and I enjoyed that better than creating one on my own, because then it wasn't, it was, because if it was one that you make up on your own, the thing is, unless you're as anal as Steven is about it, where you can go, well, to the nth degree about how far this person did this or why this happens. If you just go, well, he likes wheat and he's got these goat legs, then you can sit there and kind of go, well, is it only cooked wheat, or is it raw wheat, or is he like spread? Well, the thing, like, seriously, like, I would be like, well, any wheat product is okay. But I'm sure that for Steven would be like, no, it has to be raw, or it can't be cooked. That ruins it. And so that's the thing is that if it's kind of given to you and you have these kind of boundaries put up, it can be very fun. And now, Steven's been doing this for a while, so he automatically goes, well, I know what I'll do when I get in this situation, so I've got to be very specific about it. It's got to be, uncooked wheat, and it's got to be, and he can't do anything with his hooves, so, Okay.
Okay, so, yeah, I don't disagree with your assessment, and in fact, I was going to present myself as the sort of base example of this, and I'll get to that in a second, but what I don't have any sense for whatsoever, as I have a very bad sense, I should say, is for Steve-O, how relevant backgrounds are to your characters. Mostly because most of my playing with you has not been as you being the player up until very recently. And I'm curious, has that changed from when you used to play a lot as a player? And two, how relevant background is now?
As a player, for me, I've been doing more playing recently than I have for many years. In Andrew's campaign, I more or less try to. I don't really have a good sense for background, and the main reason for that is because I haven't played. Well, I'm talking about my new character too, but I haven't played Dungeons and Dragons for so long, and reading fantasy isn't. I mean, I read George R.R. Martin, and I've read some of the big ones that are out there, but it's not my go-to for novels and things and fiction. But so I have a difficult time wrapping my mind around my character, other than I know he wants to be good and help people and heal people and stuff. And so this cleric character started out as being, instead of just looking for treasure or what have you, I'm in an escape mode right now because I woke up here. Andrew told me I was in my village and I woke up as a prisoner of the drow. So, I'm just trying to survive right now. But beyond that, I don't know enough about the world. I really, Andrew had suggested a book to learn more about. I don't even know what the universe is called. What's the universe called?
We're in Forgotten Realms.
Forgotten Realms. Okay. So, I just need to try and read up on Dungeons and Dragons and Forgotten Realms, because I really don't know where my place is in the world. Just because I don't know anything about the world. Now, in Jimmy's Traveler campaign, again, science fiction's kind of my jam. I read a lot of it, and he gave me a little bit of a backstory with the character and explained the universe a little bit. So, and this is something of his own making. So, And I asked a few questions before we got into it and went back and forth a little bit. And so I start getting a feel for my character now. And but I can't really come up with a big, super credo like we were talking about the way Steve does. Steve immediately starts saying, I've done all these things and this is what I believe. And I mean, they're funny usually, and we all get a big kick out of it, but he plays it that way. And, but it takes me a while to fill my character out. Again, I'm just in this past year, I've been a player more than I've played for many years. And that's not to say I'm not enjoying the Dungeons and Dragons thing. I'm enjoying it immensely. It's just, I haven't played Dungeons and Dragons for so long. It's hard right now for me to wrap my mind around like who I am as that cleric, or, what my, what my family life was like, or any of that kind of stuff, or my background. I mean, I just, I don't have a feel for it. Hopefully I'll get there, but right now I don't.
So the one person I have absolutely no idea, because I've literally never played with him as a player, just as a GM, is Andrew, our guest. Andrew, as a player, how important are these backgrounds to your style play, or your informing your character whenever you create them, whatever they may be?
Well, I think the advantage of having a strong background, as all of you have sort of suggested, is that it ties you to the actions in the game. It gives you, it motivates you to action. You end up with a situation, and then you process that through your character's eyes, and that motivates you to action. If you don't understand the world, as Steve-O was saying, and an event happens, you're a passive observer. You've got no motivation to act. And that's problematic. I realized just listening to Steve-O that I need to work with him maybe a little bit more on connecting him to the world that we're in. Maybe with all of you, because my game is predominantly sort of a tactical game with, and as I had mentioned in other podcasts, a lot of the exploration and the role-playing stuff gets lost sometimes because the tactical bit seems to take the forefront. I think that my method for background is the opposite of Steve's. Steve has this kind of, I'll call it maybe a dialectic model, where he takes two elements of tension and then sort of explores what the reasonable outcome would that be. Maybe, I hope that's a fair assessment. And then he repeats that process again by taking that result, creating some tension with it, and then exploring what the reasonable outcome of that would be. And he develops a character sort of from the foundation up. And I tend to do mine backwards, looking for what were my past motivations. How did I get to where I am, which is what class I've chosen. Why did I choose to be a cleric? What was the thing that caused me to be a cleric? And then when I answer that question, I ask, well, why did I choose to join that particular organization that led me to be the cleric? And then I just follow that back. And why did I do that? And, after you've done that maybe 5 or 6 times, for me, that sort of establishes a lot of history for that character that I can then build out and flesh out and decide whether I want to eat cooked wheat or not cooked wheat, or what the problem is. So my method for creating the background is sort of the reverse of what Steve's does. I think that Steve's version is probably much more satisfying from a creative point of view, in that your options are probably a little wilder. They do come across as humorous and non-intuitive, and it is probably very satisfying. When I was listening to him do it, I was enjoying the creative process with him as he was doing it. And I was thinking that would actually be a really cool character to play. I mean, it would be a cool character to play. And Steve and I our personalities are much different in that respect. I'm probably much more efficient, less, and so my method tends to be more streamlined. Why did I do this? Why did I do it? Five questions later, I've got a backstory. I can move on to the next character.
I am not terribly efficient.
And you run away a lot.
Maybe I should use the term economical.
Economical, efficient, whatever.
Well, I think that's something that's really important to Steven's process. And then I'll talk a bit about mine, because it's a very short conversation, is that that background becomes a touchstone. Steve's very good, incredibly good at knowing what a character would do, because he's very good at centering that personality, that and the history and what this character is. So therefore, he knows what his character is, both from a personality standpoint, from a history standpoint, from a trait standpoint, from a strengths and weaknesses, and then mechanical standpoint, what the system allows him to do. And I've seen him, again, use the Star Wars campaign as an example. When he didn't understand the mechanics, it would frustrate him as a character making that character, because he has to know that. And if he knows that, then he can play that. And it's actually kind of, and I'm going to be a bit hyperbolic here, maybe, not really, it's going to sound hyperbolic, but it's kind of beautiful to watch, really. It's an amazing thing to watch. And it uniformly makes me feel really terrible. Because, and I know he doesn't mean to, and I don't want him to take that from it, but the point is that my process is that, I don't know, because I want to poke stuff. That's why I'm a fighter. I mean, I don't have any background for any of my characters unless it's given to me. If it is given to me and it has any degree of restrictions where I have to factor it in, then I just forget that it's there. I'm just not smart enough or creative enough to remember these things or to think about the implications of it or anything like that. If my characters are not one-dimensional or two-dimensional flat characters, it's an accident. It's not because of my process. The background, if you roll up the background, the game we were playing with Tracy and Steve and Jimmy and is going to be aired hopefully at some point. That is kind of interesting because we have three people who are stellar at making backgrounds for characters. And I'm sitting there going, well, I have this stuff I rolled up on my sheet because I have to, and I never look at it because it's just more text. And occasionally I look at it and I go, oh yeah, I probably should have played differently based upon what that says. I don't have anything in my background. And I'm realizing now as a player, this is potentially, I'm missing out on opportunities that I could be doing to make my playing a little more rich. And I think it's kind of interesting, the variety of answers that you guys gave. Now, I could be wrong, but my suspicion is that John and I are very alike in that regard, historically speaking. And I think it's really interesting that he found it liberating to be given a constraint and very enjoyable and say, this is something that I could be doing. And I'm thinking, this has led me to think, am I missing out on opportunities within myself? And I look at Steve's process and he says, this isn't scary. Don't be afraid. Do it. But it reminds me, and I use this analogy a lot, but it reminds me whenever Jimmy says, well, we'll just jam. We'll play instruments together. It's not scary. Well, yeah, because you know how to do it. That's why it's not scary. You're comfortable with it. When you first do it, it's frightening and it's difficult, and you are very cognitive of why you are not good at it. And it becomes very challenging to move forward in that. And so I would encourage players to do it anyway. I mean, because it doesn't get easier if you don't do it. And I'm realizing now that I need to give more thought to my background and what I can do. And I think it also is interesting that Steve-O said he doesn't understand enough about the world to necessarily create his background. And I think that's interesting that Jimmy doesn't have any need to know about the world in his background. You know, he kind of makes it up as he goes. He's very zen about it. He lives in it and goes, I have a thought, I have a trait, I'm happy with it, let's move forward. The world doesn't matter. You could make the exact same character in Traveler as you could in D&D in terms of personality-wise, right? It's just what they do and the milieu that they exist in are different. Where Steve-O, it helps him understand his role within the world. Anyway, I'm belaboring a lot here because I think it's really fascinating, the diversity of background here. So I'll just stop that there and let's jump to a different way to think about this, which is from a game master's perspective, where backgrounds, I think, become much more important, potentially, to the game. So Jimmy touched on this, so let's go ahead and hit it to him first. How important is background to the NPCs? Not background of necessarily the world, but background to NPCs, to characters, to your process as a game master.
So there's two categories of NPCs. One, the backstory doesn't matter really at all, and those are just your one-off incidental.
Your goons,
NPCs.
yeah,
your
you're
goons.
not your goons, yeah.
But then you have your jokers and your penguins, right? And their backstories mean more to me in how that character is going to respond to the players. So if I have a shop owner who is fearful and easily intimidated, or he's more afraid of like a gangster than of you guys, even though he is a fearful character, I mean, that backstory plays into it. If you have the gangster as part of his backstory, then he's going to react one way. If the gangster's not there, he's going to react another way to an intimidation roll. So things like that are important for NPC backgrounds, for me. I don't go too deep, but I mean, there's probably 3 or 4 points of that NPC, and there's only like 4 or 5 of those in any given adventure that I might have available.
You just go up to your height, I guess, right?
Exactly. One NPC per foot.
So, Steve-O, what about you? You have fairly rich stories you've typically had very rich stories, and you have, from my perspective, really, it feels like you have very three-dimensional, rich characters. Is backstory necessary for that for you, or?
Absolutely. Now, are we talking about NPCs, or are we talking about backgrounds I've created?
For right now, let's talk about background of the NPCs themselves, the characters.
So, in every adventure, I try to, usually it starts as a germ of like a story that I want to tell. And then, of course, I need the players to help tell that story. So there'll be, non-player characters involved, and they have to have their own motivation to do things. So it makes it easier for me as a game master to role play those NPCs if I have a pretty good idea of what their objectives are, whether they're a bad guy, a villain, or even if they're an ally or a potential ally. If beforehand I have a pretty good feeling for what motivates them, I mean, I may not go as far as they're married and have a family or a lot of things like that, but I do need to know what motivates them in life, because whenever we're having that conversation, even if it's a shopkeeper, I want to try and think of what his motivation is. So when we're having a role playing conversation and we'll just end up in a standoff or an argument, if you're trying to get information from him or whatever. And I just keep saying, no, I'm not going to do it or whatever. But I have to have some type of other motivation, so that'll be a key for you guys to find, to get information from him or something like that. And then if it's an NPC that goes around the group a lot, he definitely has to have some background, in my mind at least. So, because he'll do something unpredictable, and there has to be a reason why these guys do something unpredictable.
So, John, how about you? My impression of your games is there's not as much depth to the background of your NPCs.
Well, like I'll take for example the latest one we did, the post-apocalyptic one. For most of the characters you came across, basically they were just, kind of cannon fodder, as it were. I mean, they were,
goons. They were just goons.
They were goons, to put it simply. There was supposed to be a character that you were supposed to come across a little bit further on. Really, you guys are right on the cusp of coming across them. And I was going to try and have this whole thing with this, and it was kind of like the big bad that you're going to have to deal with. And then he was going to be following you, and you weren't, not
spoilers
getting away.
Spoilers.
I know, but I really don't think we're going to get back to those characters and stuff.
What?
But maybe
no.
Well, if you want to,
no.
So anyway, the one character I did have in there was a school teacher. Remember, you came across in Russia. And I did have a decent bit of story for her. I mean, her parents had been teachers. That's the reason she knew English. She had learned some English. It's broken English, but she knew some English. And there was a whole kind of, I did have stuff worked up for her to do a little bit of backstory. But, generally, this is the last one I've done in recent times, for where I've needed to have a story for the character or for the NPCs you came across, or any kind of background in general, NPC or, for the story. So, it really kind of depends.
So you tend to have maybe a handful at most, one or two that
right,
you go.
Just a handful. Yeah, I don't go too far into it because, like Steve-O said, this was going to be a character that I had planned for you to be around for a while, and so having the background, having the backstory for her, and a detailed kind of idea of how she would handle situations, confront decisions, confront each character, was kind of important. And the same thing for the, some of the villains and stuff you're going to have. So, that was going to be a decent bit of, involvement in creating this character, for you to play with and play against.
So Andrew, how about you when you're creating, NPCs or, for a campaign as a GM? How important is the backstory? How much does that inform your playing of that NPC?
And I think, as John was saying, the more I expect the party, the players to interact with that NPC, the greater the backstory is. If you have an NPC that may travel with you or adventure with you for a while, I've probably got a pretty extensive backstory on that NPC. Often that backstory is integral to an overarching plot, that there's a lot of the events in the future or future interactions are going to be connected to that NPC. NPCs that, the shopkeeper that you probably not, something that I've created on the fly. But you've had a couple NPCs that have traveled with you, and they all had a pretty decent backstory already established for them. And it motivates it informs their interaction with each of you. Clearly we don't have a lot of depth of our player backstories. And so if the players don't have a lot of backstory, then that interaction is probably a little muted. I don't feel it necessarily to flesh out an NPC's backstory. If they're interacting with the Dragonborn monk, it's sort of like I don't know. He's just there. He's present. His actions, as you said, it wouldn't matter whether he was in D&D or whether he was in a Traveler universe, same character. Then the way in which my NPC is going to interact with that character is going to be shallow as well.
So I'm going to start this question pointed at Stephen, because he creates such rich and elaborate backstories for his player characters. How much do you think, as a player, how much does knowing or sensing there's a depth behind the characters you're interacting with in the world, is it critical for you to enjoy the game more, or is it not really relevant? Or do you not even sense it, that there is greater and lesser depth to the characters that the GM is creating?
Do you need additional motivations to mow down the NPCs? I guess that's what he's asking.
Well, so, oh man,
not motivations. Is you find it more enjoyable.
I find that if there's, if
it's a Wookiee for sure.
Well, that was a special circumstance. There has to be an ability of potential. So that falls a lot on the DM, and that expectation of potential in your interactions is what's important. And I think that people who read a lot, people who absorb fiction. And this is whether it is televised, movie, book, whatever. People who absorb stories that have varied characters and things like that have an advantage for portraying a living environment that gives people who have characters that have complex motivations the ability to interact with what are really very shallow points of interaction within the story. Trying to think of a way to put this a little better. So take Andrew, for instance. Andrew is a kind of distant and up close and personal observer of human behavior. So he's been that way since before I've known him, and I've known him a long time. And it professionally, personally, socially, this view he has of people and their motivations in real life and their interactions in real life and the consequences of who they are and what they do in real life enables Andrew to do something that is very interesting. And it is, like he said, he'll take a character backwards from their character class, and why did they choose to be this, and well, okay, why did that happen that drove them in that direction? That kind of character building really only works when you have a clear understanding of how people work together and how they interact together. So I know if I'm playing with Andrew and I have a character in front of me, if it's not explicit in a module, that Andrew can very quickly give me a meaningful exchange with that character based on everything that he's observed in his life about behaviors. So that is an incredibly important part of whether or not I enjoy a campaign. So back that off, and we'll go to Steve and talk specifically about this prison thing. So, no, not really. I just
come on, man.
The eye roll that nobody else can see was just delicious.
No, that's Steven's way of saying I'm saying something personal and deep, so I'm going to back off to something humorous. That's what that is.
Right.
Dance
right.
away.
That is true.
And it's Steve-O just happens to be the outcome of that.
That's right. Right. That's right. But so Steve, both Steve and John have this really deep wealth of sci-fi, especially literary knowledge, where they have read so much over the years.
I would argue Jimmy too. I think Jimmy falls in that category as well.
Yeah, okay. Man, leaving me out.
The only problem is Jimmy can't remember any of it.
That's true.
So then that doesn't matter. So anyway, it doesn't matter. But
I'm inside the event horizon.
Well played.
Thought it would be okay, and it was not. So if you're well read, and if you've got this wealth of knowledge about story and about things that have happened within a wide variety of stories, then that also gives you the ability to, on the fly, react to a character's interaction with an NPC effectively. You don't have to necessarily have a complete backstory for the person in the bar that threatened you with a knife, but the interaction has to be realistic. And so the more you know, Rainbow and Star here, the more you know, the more that you can give the appearance that there is something behind that thin facade of an NPC in a game.
Right. He doesn't like you. I don't like you either. We're wanted in 12 systems.
So what you're saying,
you better watch yourself.
If I may reinterpret what you're saying, Steve, what you're effectively saying is Jimmy's approach to backstory. I understand the motivation. I understand the personality. even if it's only one or two traits, allow you to make a meaningful interaction. And it alludes to a deeper backstory that may not be explicit.
Right. The illusion of potential.
Okay, I can see that. So let's jump to a different topic, unless some people have some ideas on that. Comments they want to make on that?
I do want to make one comment.
Okay.
Rainbow and Star, are you playing to our senior citizen audience? Steven? Did you miss that? The More You Know. Remember those NBC? Was it NBC?
That's what he just said.
What he
the Rainbow and
yeah.
Star.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. He's playing to the audience.
The more you know.
Yeah, he's playing to the audience in the nursing homes. Because there's nobody under the age of 50 that knows what the hell that means.
You are wrong.
Really?
That is a pervasive set of imagery. Yes.
It is actually a pretty huge meme at times.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't follow the young folks.
That's right. So,
well, it's hard to from your rocker with the shades closed.
Yeah, it's true. Screaming at people to get off your lawn.
That's so true.
I was when Steve was mentioning his the motivation for the bar fight, I was just imagining actual bar fights that I've
experienced.
So yeah. So I guess he's right that I do. In fact, I would think that probably, to my fault, most of my characters are largely me.
It makes them easy to play. You don't have to go outside of your wheelhouse.
I think we all try to put a facet of our own personality into a character. I mean, sometimes we're just, playing the guy we want to be, but it's what we're attracted to.
I don't know. I can usually open locks easier than my character can.
There's always the dice part of your personality that's going to mess everything up.
That's particularly true if you're playing a rogue goat.
Yeah,
that's true. Goat boy. He is a boy. He's a real goat boy.
Actually, I've been kind of consumed with the idea of, are the goat legs all of his limbs or just his legs? So basically, as a goat,
he's a satyr.
He has a human boy torso, like basically a satyr. Is it
So I was thinking that it was just the legs at first. Yeah. However,
so I went on with the whole thing of having the hooved hands and stuff, and that's where I got kind of stuck. And then I'm like, well, wait a minute, maybe that's not the case. Maybe he has little boy hands. And he could be perfectly fine picklock.
Yeah, he could, but again, he really had to suffer with all the noise that his hooves made on his stealth checks. So what ended up happening was he fell in with the guy who was the sap maker for the Thieves Guild. And so they basically just opened a few of those up and dumped the lead out and made him some little durable leather sheaths to go over his hooves. But then it was a problem because no, they were not goat hide. You're a cruel.
Some kid skin saps he's wielding.
And it wouldn't be cannibalism, but it would be kind of weird that maybe his shoes were made from his mother.
Oh. Wow, that's
okay. All right. Let's. Okay, hold on. Okay, so
see, that's the way John rolls with the backstory.
I have another question to throw out there, which we've sort of talked a little bit around, and John sort of spoke to earlier, much earlier, not the most recent thing. So my question is on the backstory creation that's built into rule system. How advantageous do you find this? How useful do you find it to either your NPCs if you're a GM or your PC if you're playing as a player? I've already said that, I roll these things and I'm like, yeah, whatever. And it has nothing to do with how I play my character. And I think that we should really differentiate between two types of rule sets. The one is, by the way, here's some backstory for your character. And that would be like a Dungeons & Dragons 5e sort of exists in that kind of way. Versus something like Traveler, which your character is only created through the process of basically making a backstory of sorts, however shallow it may be. And I find personally the D&D process does nothing for me but the Traveler process does allow me to start thinking about my character as I create it. So how about for you guys? How much does the backstory mechanics, is it useful, or they're just a necessary thing to balance stuff, as John said?
Well, like for me, in most things, I don't really. I will take it into account if it's there. I mean, there's a number that don't, systems that don't have anything like that really. But the one difference is that it almost kind of harkens back to earlier something about the system itself. Kind of has an effect on this. So like with Traveler Drink, you start off when you make your character, you get to a point that I usually try and stop my characters at about 34 years old. You roll up basically you roll up every 4 years of what they went through that 40 years, the skills they get. And that's a good stopping point, because when you get to 38, you have to start rolling for a decrease in physical attributes. So, and I found that really actually at about 28. But anyway, so, when you start playing a character in Traveler Drink, you're already, in your mid to late 30s or even 40s generally, if you want to have any skills at all, anything at all in that. But in D&D, generally the impression is you're about 18. You're fresh and just got kicked out of your parents' house, and then that's how you start out. So your backstory is that you're still going through puberty, or you're, and you think, daggone, my parents were rough on me, and shucky darn, and kicking the dirt and kicking a can down the alleyway, versus other systems where you might be a fully matured adult that has gone through an awful lot in their life. So there's just that.
Well, I think we've established before, I said it in another podcast, that at least in my interpretation, when you look at a game like D&D, yeah, you're absolutely right. And I've compared a game like D&D to Luke Skywalker being the farm boy just starting his adventures, and Traveler is Han Solo. You know that he's had a bunch of adventure in the past and he's seasoned. So Traveler has a rule set that allows you to fill out some of that backstory. But Frank, I would like to comment on one thing on the Call of Cthulhu adventure that our campaign that I just recently ran. I created each one of your all's characters with a pretty heavy backstory, and I've gamed with all of you guys before, so I tried to create characters that I thought, and your backstories, the things that I thought you would like. Like Frank, you were the academic. John, you were an ex-Marine, but now a private investigator. And Steve, a newspaper writer. And Jimmy, an FBI agent, undercover, investigating, and also ex-military. And it's all based on the years that I've gamed with you guys, what I thought you might like to play, and based a little bit on your personalities. And but I saved the last part, which was some of the until we had our solo sessions, and you completed rolling up your characters to have little details about your personal life. And Frank, you rolled up a daughter. You rolled up, and then we created a situation where your wife had been killed in a car accident, and you have like a 10-year-old daughter. And so there were more than once in the adventure, I said, "Hey, Frank, it's about time to go pick up your daughter from school." And, you had her in mind and things like that. So that was a tool that was in the rules that we were able to implement and, create a richer history and backstory. And in a way, someone you had to think about and care about and be concerned about. So I think some of those tools can help fill out a character, especially in games like Traveler and Call of Cthulhu, in which the characters begin as an already fully formed investigator or character that has a big history. So it almost dictates that you have to have some type of backstory to start that character out with. And don't think it restricted. For instance, Steven immediately started, he took the backstory I wrote for him, but then he immediately started applying his own nuances to it and took it in a different direction. And yeah, the geo tracker, and very first night, he's like, I show up in the geo. So I'm like, okay, he's not a very successful newspaper writer. So, he just
Steven does his own foil.
So he took a little bit of the background I gave him and then just, ran with it. And he did other things in the adventure that, I didn't expect. And it made it a lot of fun. And I think it helped everybody's motivations in it. So, and again, try a very story-oriented type of campaign. So
yeah, that probably becomes more important with one-shots too, don't you think? That the game master come to a game, if you're going to do like a one evening sort of play, you've got the characters all fleshed out with a backstory, so that
I think it depends on the type of game you're playing. I mean, if you're going to do just a war game and gladiatorial combat, what's it really matter if it's a one shot? But if it's going to be a lot of investigation, a lot of conversation with NPCs and that sort of thing, which I don't really see a one shot being that way. I don't know, then maybe you would have to have somewhat of a backstory. Steve obviously would be able to create his within 10 minutes, would already have an idea of where his guy's going. So
I really want to say quickly and stuff, while I've enjoyed the character I'm playing in Call of Cthulhu, I think it would have been really fun to play the nutty, conspiracy theorist, obsessed newspaper that Steve got. I think it would have been really fun. So,
right. But I think you've had a pretty good time with your private eye guy, though.
Yeah,
so. I think I want to play Troy my next time. Yeah. I don't want to play the FBI guy. I want him to go home to his wife and settle in his colostomy bag and have a good life after that. With whatever her name was. We can do that. Yeah. And I want to play Troy.
Andrew.
Sure. I think Troy would be fun. Or Smooch.
Cool.
I could play Smooch, though he died.
I thought, did Smooch die or did Smooch just, kind of like lose it?
He lost it, went to an insane asylum. I think he might have died. I can't remember. We could have him alive. Smooch would be cool.
Now, there's a character you started creating because your other character got injured pretty severely. And so I had to bring somebody in, quickly. And that's when I said, okay, these other guys on a search party show up and one of them's Jimmy, who volunteers to stay while your wounded character's, spirited back to the camp. And you just took off, hey, I'm Troy, Anyway, Andrew.
Yeah. I think that even probably less important than the type of the campaign, whether it's a one shot or a long term, is the nature of the individual player. If they are an active player that drives the narrative, then it's kind of important that they have a fleshed backstory. If they're a passive player who is enjoying the game, just sort of observing the action and following the story, and they're not as engaged, then it's probably less important that they have a fully fleshed out backstory. Of course, it might be that the reason they're not as engaged is that they don't have the fleshed out backstory. As a DM, I often go back to the backstories and look for the hooks. What kind of things is this player, what are their long-term goals? What kind of things have happened to them that would, so I can add those elements to the narrative to pull that player deeper into the action. So I think that the reason the backstory isn't so important is that it does connect the character to the overarching narrative. And without the backstory, they are just a passive observer. And it's difficult for a game master, somebody that's running a game, to pull a character in if they don't have those hooks to grab onto.
Like the one thing with the game system is, like, for me, D&D is such a simplistic system. I mean, part of it is just the fact that it's fantasy, but it to me, it never lended to me thinking about character development so much. I mean, the really the onus was on the GM to produce something, for me to play. And so my attitude generally was kill bugbears, get loot. and so the challenges were just, making the rolls for, being stealthy or hitting them over the head or whatever it was and stuff. So whenever we play D&D, and maybe that's part of the reason I don't find it that compelling of a system, is that it is that for me. I never kind of, maybe took the responsibility to create my character as a complex person. It was just more that I'm a ranger. I shoot things and then I loot the bodies. And so that was kind of the aspect for it. So.
Yeah, I think that I've been remiss a little in the underlying narrative of the adventure that we're running. That there are a lot of internal conflicts within the region that I've thrown out clues to, but really haven't pushed them. I've intended to do that a little more with the latest NPC that I've introduced to the group, where she's going to be sort of giving you more narrative hooks as opposed to just so that you can understand the political environment. And I think probably in the first few episodes, and we've been playing for a while now, but we're still kind of in Act 1, where we are still introducing the players and what the environment is, and we're sort of still in that introductory stage of what the key plot elements are that will develop later. And we're just now getting to the point where we're going to be transitioning into sort of Act 2, I think. So.
Well, Andrew, and don't feel too awfully responsible as a rebuttal of that. I think, I'm kind of in John's camp. It's fantasy. It's been so long since I've played Dungeons and Dragons, and really a long time since I've read fantasy. Although I have read all the George R.R. Martin stuff just a few years ago, but. It's just it's harder for me to wrap my mind around a fantasy character. That's just the short end of it. And I don't think it's any kind of deficiency on your part as a game master. It's just my own. And plus, I haven't been a player for many years, Yeah, I don't think it's any reflection of what you've been doing. For one thing, we've all been having a really, really good time. I've been having a better time playing Dungeons and Dragons than I thought I would.
So actually, this is the first time this has happened to me. Is we're playing Andrew's game, and I'm really enjoying something we hardly ever do. I don't know that we've ever really done it. Is the tactical board game feel. And part of that is because Fantasy Grounds lends itself so well to that. But this is the first time I've played a monk character. And it's only recently, probably the last 2 games, where I'm looking up through Fantasy Grounds the various skills my monk has. And some of those skills reference your backstory. Like lightly. They'll reference, a particular monastery you might have come from. You get to choose that. But it lends itself to some of my monk skills. And I've just recently started thinking about, what is a Dragonborn, which is a weird class to pick for a monk, I think. How did he become a monk? Where's his monk, I envision like a mountain setting like you see with monks. And that, how'd he get there? And he's... why'd he go there?
The monks found a little Dragonborn in swaddling clothes.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, well, maybe at the base of the thing, they found this Dragonborn, and he doesn't have a family, so he doesn't know how to be a dragon, and he's raised as a monk. So, yeah, that's exactly it.
And this is a perfect fantasy novel, because then you'll find out you have some kind of secret thing, and you're the chosen one, and, there was a whole big... people that were trying to wipe you out because there was a prophecy that there was a Dragonborn that would, free the land or something like that. It's perfect.
Or maybe the mother just had an aneurysm while she was watching you in the river.
Dragon clothes.
And then there you go.
It was polishing her scales.
So, I'll say that to sort of echo some of that and to kind of get to a wrap-up thing, that I'll say that the other day, not the last session, but the session before that, it looked like we were going to get a total party wipe because we were just doing very, very poorly and we assaulted like 17,000 drow. At least it seemed like that. And it looked like we weren't going to survive. And I honestly was looking at my character that night and thinking, yeah, no, it's fine. Who cares? If he dies. And it's the first time I've ever played a bard. And I've realized through the last hour and so of recording this podcast why I no longer cared whether I died or not. It's because I failed as a player to come up with a compelling backstory for my character. I never played a bard, and I don't really understand how to play a bard. And part of it is because I've got a flat bard that has no real dimension to it. So I created a character, and I picked spells that were like, well, that seems like something a bard would have. Well, that seems like something a bard would have. And it turns out they weren't useful at all. So I felt kind of annoyed. And I ended up redoing the character so that they had more useful spells. And I feel like my role is crowd control. But I don't really understand why that's my role. And that's why I don't have any real emotional investment in my character. So I think that one of the outcomes of this podcast for me in the very short term is I'm going to sit down with my bard because he lived. And now he's going to continue on. And now I've got to figure out why I'm playing a bard other than I never did and I want to try it. There has to be something there. I've got to take some pages from Steve's or some tomes from his massive collection of books on how do you do backstory? What's motivating this character? What his purpose is? Why he's in here? What his role in the party is? And I
what's going to happen though is just because you said this, Andrew's going to kill you next time.
Probably, and that's
I never kill anyone.
No, the dice kill.
Your choices result in your death.
Right, and that may very well be true. But
DMs don't kill people; NPCs do.
Yeah,
right.
So, to sort of wrap this up, that we've bounced a lot on backstory, and I'll be honest, I started this episode thinking I don't have a lot to say, and I've actually been probably the most educational episode for me personally we've ever done. I've learned a lot, and I've started to rethink how I role play and how I could do it more enjoyably for me, which is ultimately what you want out of this. And so, backstory, I think, to echo some of what Steve was saying when he started this, is don't be afraid to look at backstory as a way to enhance your enjoyment of your character in your play. And you should embrace that as much as possible. Now, we've talked a lot about the processes that we use and a lot of things we could do. And, we've said where it could be better and that sort of thing. But I think Jimmy, as his way, has a few resources that may help you get through some of this. So hit it, James.
So first, I would like to point everyone to Geek and Sundry. And just about everybody out there, I imagine, knows geekandsundry.com.
That was a link I was going to use too.
Oh,
high five.
Was it the five? Was it the 5 steps to writing a killer RPG? Yeah, character number 4 in there. I think is particularly relevant to you, right? You want to read that one out? What's the title of it?
Let me bring up the page. Daggone it. I put the page away because Frank was like, Jimmy's got this thing. And I was like, I'll just put the page away. Let's see here. Number 4. Hold on. Loading. Step 1, step 4. Bedevil your character with conflict.
That's definitely you. So, yeah, Geek and Sundry. And then the second one I have 3, is on Great GM. It's a YouTube channel. He has a pretty interesting bit that he does on avoiding player background story mistakes and things to avoid.
What would be an example of something to avoid that you've seen on there? Just curious.
Yeah, like if you this is new players in particular, starting your character out and saying, my character killed a god, and then he got this special weapon, and it's a Vorpal sword that will kill everything that comes. It's like, no. It really doesn't work that way.
Well, that's what I was kind of talking about, where, I was saying that I thought a lot of systems put background stuff in there to limit characters so they don't do that.
Right.
They, keep from going, oh, well, my guy can do so-and-so, or he did so-and-so.
Well, I think, I mean, as a game master, though, come on. I mean, you have to develop this backstory together. I mean, for instance, if Steve creates this big, rich backstory of his character, but he doesn't let me know what all those motivations are, then how am I supposed to work with that? How am I going to write a story around that for him? Which, we had several conversations during the Call of Cthulhu campaign, and as he worked it out, we worked it out together so that I could add that.
And I think his advice sort of lends itself to that sort of a way of thinking as well. Yeah. It's like you don't want to create a character that doesn't have legs when you're in a universe that's filled with stairs. Or maybe you do. It could be interesting. I don't know.
If you're Steve, you would.
Right. And then the third thing I have is on dndspeak.com. They have 100 character backgrounds. That gives you a good sample. They're geared towards Dungeons and Dragons, and they have a little button there where it will randomly generate one for you. And it feels to me like most of those that they give in that example, you could use more than one of them as your character background. They're more like traits in some respects, or single events in your player's backstory that you could have 3 or 4 of them and they wouldn't contradict. Or maybe like Steven, they would contradict and they'd be fine. So those are 3 that I'll put in the show notes.
Yeah, so, I mean, the key is the question why. So, you get those little traits and you say, well, why is this? How does that apply to my character? Why is this relevant? So, that's some great stuff. These are just some thoughts we had about backgrounds. It kind of got expansive in places, and that's good sometimes. If you've got any thoughts about backgrounds or any backgrounds for favorite characters of yours you'd like to share, hit us up in the contact information. Come along in a second. And stop recording.
That's all we have for this week. Thanks for spending time with us. Please leave a review and comments wherever you listen. It helps others find the show. If you have topic suggestions or would like to get in touch, you can reach us at roleplaygeeks@roleplaygeeks.com. Head on over to the website for an archive of all our previous shows, as well as links to all our social media channels. Thanks again, and we'll catch you next week.